All right, here we go. We have former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. Welcome to VladTV.
Hi, Vlad. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, you have a very, very interesting story, but this is our first time here, so I want to start in the very beginning. So you were born and raised in Chicago.
Yes, I was born and raised in the city of Chicago, a working-class neighborhood, ethnically diverse, a lot of Italian Americans, Polish Americans, Irish Americans. Irish boy falls in love with an Italian girl, very typical American story. Latino families began moving in when I was growing up. And it was, I lived in a little 5-room apartment. My mother and father were working people. But like all of us, or most of us, I think, we look back on our early years with fond memories.
And actually, growing up, you had somewhat of a poor family, and you were shining shoes and delivering pizzas and the such.
Yes, my mother and father were, as I said, they were working people. My father was an immigrant who came to America from Yugoslavia after World War II. He spent 4 years in a Nazi prisoner of war camp, and then after that, he was in a refugee camp for 3 years because he was waiting for the United States Congress that one day his youngest son, me, would become a member of, to pass a law that allowed my father and millions of others like him with these long and hard-to-pronounce last names a chance to come to America. It was called the Displaced Persons Act. So your ancestors from Ukraine, Polish Americans, Serbians, Croatians, Bosnians, all kinds of people from Eastern Europe were finally allowed to come to the United States. My father came here, didn't have a penny in his pocket, didn't speak a word of English. He met my mother. She was American-born. I think I was very lucky that way because had my mother come from the old country like my dad, I think my first name would be as hard to pronounce as my last name, and I would have never been elected governor of Illinois. But they were both hardworking people. My dad worked in a steel factory for most of his life. He did other jobs too. And my mother worked for the Chicago Transit Authority, taking fares and passing out transfers at the subway stations. And she had other jobs, but that was the principal job she had for most of the years I was growing up. But they never owned a home. They were like a lot of parents. They worked real hard, sacrificed, scrimped, and saved so that one day they can send their kids to college. And my older brother and I were the beneficiaries of that, and I had a chance to get a college education and go on to have opportunities my father and mother could never dream of having. It's the American story, really.
Right, because you went to University of Tampa first, right?
Well, yes. I went to public school in Chicago. I wasn't exactly setting the world on fire there. I got a D in algebra, which was a classic case of grade inflation. I deserved an F. I have no clue about anything with regard to algebra, but the teacher took pity on me and she passed me. So I wasn't exactly someone that the higher universities were interested in taking. So I went to the University of Tampa for 2 years, which is a nice school, but it wasn't exactly, a higher academic school. And I was able to go there and work hard to get good grades, and then I transferred to Northwestern University here in Illinois, Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago, which is a highly acclaimed school. And I was able to get a degree in history from Northwestern and then went on to law school after that.
Right. You went to Pepperdine for law school.
Yes, I did. And there's an example of another school that is doing very well now and has a very good reputation now. But when I went there, they pretty much took anybody who applied because I was applying to a lot of other schools. And, I'd send my application to Harvard, for example, on a Monday. I got my letter of rejection back on a Tuesday. And that was pretty much the case with most of the schools. Even though I was a good student in college, I didn't do so good on those standardized tests. And as a result of that, I was not really, in a good position to get into a higher level law school. But Pepperdine, took me. And I was able to get through law school. I wasn't exactly a great student there either, but I got through, and I eventually passed the bar exam the second time around.
Okay, so you get your law degree, and you get married, and your wife actually has a lot of political connections at the time.
That's right. I met my wife on the 6th of March, 1988. She was wearing a red dress. It was a Sunday. It was at a fundraiser for her father. Her father was a local political leader here in Chicago, old school Chicago ward boss. There were a lot of them back then, and he was one in his little area. And I met my wife, Patty, and we started dating a few weeks after that, and it didn't take long for me to see that she was the quality person that she is. And it didn't take long for me to fall in love, and She said yes eventually, and 2 years later we were married, and we've been together. We joined hands together, we exchanged vows, we walked through life together. We had a lot of good times, and we had some very difficult times, and she's been through it thick and thin. And when she took the vows to get married, she meant it. When the priest said, in good times and bad, she's been there in the good times and the bad. And I'm very fortunate, blessed, and so lucky that I met Patty and fell in love with her, and I've walked through life with her.
Well, I mean, your first foray into politics was as an assistant prosecutor.
Well, yes, I had a job as an assistant state's attorney, prosecutor in Cook County. There were about 790 of us, because Cook County is a big county, Chicago is a huge city. And the state's attorney elected by the people of Cook County at that time was Richard M. Daley. He would go on to become the mayor of Chicago and break his father's record for being the longest-serving mayor in Chicago history. His father was Richard J. Daley, a legendary political figure. And the Daley family in Chicago has always been royalty, political royalty. So he was the state's attorney. I was one of the 790 or so that worked under him. I never met him when he was my boss. It was only until I got into politics that I met him. And then later on, when I became the governor, Mayor Daley acted like I still worked for him. So it was, in some respects, the beginning of learning about the political process in Chicago and in Illinois when I worked as a prosecutor in the branch courts, the misdemeanor branch courts, and at the traffic court. I didn't make it to the felony trial courts because I went off into private sector after 2 years, but it was a good place to start, learned a lot, met a lot of good people.
Okay, and then by 92, you actually jumped into public office.
So an opportunity presented itself in early 1992 with my father-in-law in the politics in his area, where he was searching for a candidate to run for the state legislature. And I was asked by him if I'd be interested in running. And I always had an interest in government and politics because I had a history degree. And ever since I was a little boy, I read history books. So when this opportunity presented itself, I jumped at it. We fully expected that I was going to lose. In fact, while we're doing this interview right now, the studio that I'm in is actually in that legislative district that I ran in a neighborhood called the Ukrainian Village. And the guy that I ran against had been a 12-year incumbent, and he was supported by most of the political leaders on the northwest side of the city and most of the powerful ward bosses. I had won, the one who was my father-in-law. But I met a lot of good people in that campaign. I think I was pretty good at it, and we worked real hard. It was really thrilling, actually. And, the first time is the most special one. At least that's been my experience. And, we won that campaign. It was very local. And that was the beginning of my political career. And I look back on it, and I'm glad I did it for the most part. On the other hand, after how it all ended, I would say that sometimes I've thought about I should have just stayed as a lawyer practicing law. I think our lives would have been a lot simpler, probably a lot easier, a lot happier, and a lot more lucrative.
Okay, and then by 96, you actually didn't seek re-election because you ended up going to the congressional district instead.
So I ran for state representative twice, was elected twice, and then an opportunity developed to run for the United States Congress. Dan Rostenkowski was a very prominent United States congressman. He had been the congressman from this area since 1959, and he was the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, which is the most important committee in the United States Congress, in the House. So he had been very powerful for a very long time and had close working relationships with something like, President Eisenhower, President Kennedy, President Johnson, President Nixon, President Ford, President Carter, President Reagan, President Bush, and then President Clinton. And then he was indicted, and then he was defeated by a Republican in 1994, which presented an opportunity for Democrats like me of the next generation to try to run for that congressional seat. So when that happened, that was an opportunity that if you let go by, you'll never get that chance again. You've got to seize your opportunities when they present themselves. So I was one of many Democrats who was very interested in running for that seat. After it all shook out, I won a hotly contested primary and then ran in the general election against the Republican incumbent, and I won and became the congressman.
So now you're in the big league. You're now a congressman. What really changed in your life at that point?
That's a great question. I would pinch myself because I think a lot of your viewers and your listeners know where the Congress meets. It's in Washington, D.C., in that beautiful Capitol building, right? And, I think about the early jobs I had in my life. I shined shoes when I was 9 years old. I started working since I was 9, shining shoes till I was 13, and then I had jobs delivering pizzas. I worked in different factories. I worked in a meat packing plant. I worked up in Alaska on the Alaskan pipeline. But I worked in different offices when I became a lawyer, but I never worked in a workplace like that, right? With all that history and that beautiful building and the different men and women who walked through the halls of that building. It's such a historic place. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was a United States congressman for 2 years. President Kennedy was a congressman for 6 years, and his office was in the Cannon building on the 5th floor where mine was. President Nixon was a congressman, and he and President Kennedy, as young congressmen, they were elected the same year, 1946. They were also on the 5th floor of the Cannon building where my congressional office was. So I would periodically pinch myself. I thought about my upbringing and where I came from, and, they were, somewhat humble origins. I wasn't born and raised in a log cabin, but, growing up around Cicero and Armitage in a working class neighborhood in Chicago, surrounded by factories in a 5-room apartment, and here I am suddenly sitting next to Ted Kennedy's son. Senator Kennedy's son, Patrick, was a colleague of mine in the House Armed Services Committee, sitting right next to me when we'd have committee meetings. And on the other side of that committee was Congressman, the late Sonny Bono from Sonny and Cher, right? He was a Republican congressman, the former mayor of Palm Springs, a great guy, by the way. But he was a Republican on the other side, same committee as me. And then I remember the day that I was assigned to join what's called a conference committee. A handful of members of the House Armed Services Committee meet with a handful of members from the United States Senate who also sit on the Armed Services Committee, and you meet to work out the differences between the legislation that comes out of the House and comes out of the Senate. And I was fortunate because the Democratic leader, Ron Dellums, a historic figure, actually liked me, and he put me on that conference committee as a freshman. That's very unusual. But I went to my first meeting, Vlad, and it was really it was remarkable to me because I felt like, I was looking around and there's Senator Ted Kennedy, his brothers, John F. Kennedy assassinated, Robert Kennedy assassinated, the Kennedy family, the most prominent family politically in American history, probably, maybe the Kennedys, the Adamses, and the Bushes. John McCain was there in that committee. Joe Biden was a member of that committee. John Warner, who's a senator from Virginia, who was one of Elizabeth Taylor, the movie actress's husbands, like the 6th or 7th husband. I remember looking at that guy and I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, that guy had sex with Elizabeth Taylor. And I wasn't saying that out loud, but I couldn't help but think that, right? And then I kept thinking to myself, someone's going to realize I'm in here and they're going to kick me out. But then I had to remind myself, no, I'm a duly elected member of the United States Congress. In fact, so it was good. I learned a lot. And it was quite an experience. So you asked me a simple question, what was it like when I was a congressman? It was remarkable. And I found myself at the highest levels of government in the United States, this great country that I've been blessed to be born in, the place my father as an immigrant appreciated and loved. And then, I spent 6 years there, did different things, including visiting a war zone in 1999, Yugoslavia, when our country was at war with Yugoslavia. You may or may not remember, but there were 3 American servicemen that were taken prisoner by the Serbs. I'm Serbian. My dad came from there. And I joined the Reverend Jesse Jackson to go to Serbia during the war, a little bit like what's happening now in Ukraine, only we were bombing that country, Serbia. And in that war zone, Reverend Jackson and I met with President Milosevic of Yugoslavia and negotiated the release of those 3 soldiers. That was, of course, my best moment, my finest hour during my 6 years as congressman when I was able to help Reverend Jackson bring those guys home. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I'm so glad we got those guys back.
Yeah, congratulations for that. That was a very big deal. I read about that as well.
Thank you, Rod.
Okay, so you stayed 6 years as a congressman, and then you decided to run for governor.
Then I ran for governor, and I was the first Democrat elected in 26 years in Illinois in 2002. And it's a hard thing to do when you run for governor in a big state like Illinois. It's the 5th largest state in America at the time. I understand it's gone down. It's the 6th. But when I ran and when I was the governor, it was the 5th largest state. And it's a small United States, so demographically, if you want to look at the what United States of America looks like with the different people like in it, in Illinois is a smaller version of it. The southern part of our state is the American South. In fact, you can reach Montgomery, Alabama by car from Carbondale, Illinois, sooner than you could reach Chicago, Illinois from Carbondale, Illinois. And so the values in Southern Illinois are the values of the American South. They're good, decent people. They're very supportive of, their Second Amendment rights when it comes to guns. They're culturally conservative, but they're hardworking, good people who love their country. And so the experts were saying that a guy with a name like mine could never get elected down there. And it was true that prior to my election, most of the people who were elected to office in Illinois statewide had these sort of anglicized names, my predecessor's name was Ryan. Before him, it was Edgar. Before him, it was Thompson. Before Thompson, it was Walker. Before Walker, it was Kerner. So they had these easy names, and nobody had a long and hard to pronounce last name like mine. And so the experts said, no chance. And plus, I came from Chicago. There hadn't been a Democrat from Chicago elected statewide in recent history, maybe never. And so the odds were long, but the timing was good, and we ran a good campaign, and it was very competitive. The Democratic primary was very hard, but the hard primaries are good because they help you, they prepare you and put you in a good position for the general election that happens afterwards. And so by the time I was able to win that primary, I was in a real good position to run against the Republican candidate for governor. And by then, after 26 years of one party, the people of Illinois were looking for change. And so I was able to swim the currents of change. And it pretty much just kind of pushed me along. So the general election was far easier than the primary.
Well, at the time, Barack Obama was a senator of Illinois.
State senator, yeah.
So how involved was he in your, campaign for governor at that time?
In helping me, you mean?
Yes.
He was part of our policy team. So he volunteered to kind of help on constructing some of the policies and some of the issues that I ran on. So he was helpful in that respect. There's an interesting story, Vlad. When I won, and we had the victory party at the Finkel Steel Company where my father worked, and I have vivid memories of that steel company because my father worked there for many, many years, and he would come home to our little 5-room apartment. You could smell the steel factory on him, and he worked 6, sometimes 7 days a week. He was always working. Overtime, any chance he got to work, he worked. And he would sometimes take my brother and me there when he worked the night shift a couple of times to show us what it was like. And his point was, you should go to school and do your best at school so you can go on and wear a suit and tie to work rather than, the kind of clothes I have to wear with this hard work that I do. And I remember the steel furnaces where they'd fabricate steel at the Finkel Steel Company, and it was like looking at Dante's Inferno. He would show us these hot ovens, and they were so big, and the steel would go through there and be forged. And the point my father made was, for my brother and me, you can work at a good place like this, and you can earn a decent living and earn a good wage, but you can do so much better, and your life will be so much easier, and there's no heavy lifting if you just go and get a college education. And so to celebrate my father, to sort of identify his, my working class background, we always had my political events and victory parties at the Finkel Steel Company. And so on election night, when I had become the first Democrat in 26 years, it was a historic event. And that night, there must have been 10 to 15,000 people in the audience. It was really unprecedented because everybody else in politics, when you win in Chicago anyway, or Illinois, they have their victory parties at the hotels downtown. So this was a very different scene. And after I gave my speech and jumped off the stage and began shaking hands along the rope line, there was this young state senator who I knew, who'd been part of my policy team, on the other side of the rope line, and I shook his hand, and it was Barack Obama. And I'd indicated to the security people who had just showed up, because now I was the new governor. Suddenly, without me even knowing it, I've got all this security. I indicated to them to lift the rope, let him come back stage and be with the so-called dignitaries who were behind the stage. And so Obama, was invited to be back there with my family and others. And who would have thought 6 years later, Vlad, that event that I had, as big as it was, would be dwarfed by his, which was at Millennium Park in Chicago in November of 2008, first African-American president elected in American history. 500,000 people were there. It was a magical night. I was backstage, and it would be that night that planted the seeds for what would become the calamity that came into my life and the ultimate ruin that I was brought to with the events that unfolded after that. But I just thought you'd find that kind of interesting. That night when I won, when I was maybe my greatest moment of triumph in my life, there was Obama on the other side of the rope line. Years would go by, 6 years later. I'd be backstage with his big victory party that dwarfed mine. And then an event began that led to the so-called sale of the Senate seat, which was a big lie. But that would ultimately lead to my downfall. It's kind of an interesting unfolding of events, I think. What do you think, Vlad?
Yeah, extremely interesting. Extremely interesting. Okay, so now you're governor of Illinois. And this is your first time in a position of this caliber.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff happened. There was a big moratorium on state executions that you pushed. Was there a reason why you were against the death penalty?
Well, it was my predecessor who did that. So after I was elected, he put in a moratorium on the death penalty in Illinois. What he did was he also released a whole bunch of guys out of death row. It turned out that DNA tests showed they were innocent, that they did not commit the murders they were convicted of. And so he, to his credit, put that moratorium on because the system in Illinois was broken, that a lot of these guys were being railroaded. They hadn't committed the murders they were convicted of. And so when I became the governor, I extended that moratorium. I didn't lift it. I didn't change it. And it's interesting you ask about the death penalty. Prior to that, I had been a supporter of the death penalty. In fact, when I ran for Congress in 1996 during the Democrat primary, one of the issues that distinguished me from my biggest opponent in the Democratic primary was the issue of the death penalty. She was against it. I had been for it. And we would have debates and discuss the merits or demerits of the issue. As the years went by and we learned about the broken system and those guys who hadn't committed murder who were facing the death penalty, my position changed. And I have to say, looking back, she was right and I was wrong. And in view of what I've experienced in the criminal justice system, with the imperfections in it, with some of the brokenness of it, even how they rig it sometimes, my positions to this day is I don't support the death penalty. I do believe there are some cases that are so bad that natural justice requires it, but I don't have enough faith and confidence that the system works enough where you're not going to execute an innocent person. So my position has evolved from my own experience. And so my predecessor did that. It wasn't me. I extended it, but I did nothing to change it.
Also, you're very big on gun control.
Yes, and here's another place where my views have evolved from my own personal experience. So, yes, you point out gun control. When I ran for Congress as a state lawmaker and some of the positions I took and some of the bills that I sponsored, coming from an urban district, a city district, a high crime area, I pushed a lot of gun control initiatives. And as a result, the NRA gave me a grade of an F-, not an F. They gave me F-. Now, I think I deserved a D-, not an F-, but I got a D. I got an F-. In the district I ran in Congress for, David Axelrod, who's a very well-known political consultant, he went on to be one of the political gurus for President Obama. But Axelrod put together a direct mail piece, and on the front cover, it was very well done, real professional, multicolored. I think the opening page was, I got an F-. And then you have to open it up. And then it says, from the NRA. We actually ran on that. Now, the years would go by, and I would learn more about that issue. And when I ran for governor, one of the arguments against me being unelectable was that issue, was the people in Southern Illinois and Central Illinois, where they support the Second Amendment, would not vote for a guy from Chicago with an F- rating from the NRA. But by then, 6 years in Congress, I learned more about the issue, and I became less of an advocate for gun control than I had been when I was a state lawmaker. I still was one, but not as much. And then when I became governor, I learned more about the complexities of the issue. And then, after the calamity again came into my life, and I saw what government can do and how they can rig things and come after you and steal your freedom, I'm a lot more not only open-minded, but I'm a lot more sensitive to the argument that the Second Amendment advocates make, which is, freedom is fragile, and if the government takes away our guns, that's a step towards them taking away our freedoms. I used to dismiss that argument, but in view of what happened to me in my hard experience, I very much appreciate that argument, understand that argument, and sympathize with that argument. So there, too, my positions have evolved.
Well, 2006, you go for your reelection. And Obama supported you on this one as well, right?
Yes, he did. He did. He supported me in my reelection for 2006. And then after I won that, I was the first governor to endorse Obama for president when he positioned himself in 2007 to run in the Democratic primaries and the caucuses in 2008.
Okay, and speaking of 2008, you were doing a speech in front of a group of African Americans, and you said that you sometimes consider yourself the first African American governor of Illinois.
Did I say that? I know people would say that about me, but did I actually say that? I said later on I would say something really stupid about being blacker than Obama. That I remember saying, and that came after I was arrested. But did I actually say that? It's okay. I take great pride in it if I did say that. Go ahead.
It came up in my notes. So,
look, I hope I did.
Hold on a second. Let's look it up. Let's look it up. As constituents loyal to him continue to contract, Rod Blagojevich is doing his absolute well. One example, how he recently held events, programs catered to the African American community, among others like the elderly. In the past Monday, in a speech to the City Club of Chicago, Blagojevich may have gone too far.
Sounds like I said it.
And that's where he said, there are times I consider myself the first African American governor of Illinois.
Fair enough. Yeah, it sounds like something I would say, and I'm not going to unsay that. I'm not going to walk it back. I felt a real affinity for the black community when I was the governor. I to this day I do. I feel that way. I feel, when I think about the black community, I think about fellow underdogs. Their life experience has been a lot more challenging than mine, but I have comparable experiences growing up in the inner city of Chicago and going through the public school system. And issues of inferior schools, inferior health care, the kind of things that I saw in my life when I became governor and actually had the power, Vlad. I would push a lot of that stuff, and we did a lot of things on health care, free public transportation for our seniors, breast and cervical cancer screenings for uninsured women who disproportionately are black. So there were a lot of policy initiatives that I did and successfully achieved that helped black people. So in that sense, I think I was saying it probably in the context of that. Now, later on, when my troubles came, you may ask me later when we go down the narrative, but I said something that was really something I shouldn't have said, and I apologize for, and that was that I was blacker than Obama. But I'll explain that to you later if you want to ask me about it, or if you want to ask me about it now.
No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. Okay, so here you are. You're a second-term governor in Illinois. You're on top of the world. Obama, is elected president, so his Senate seat becomes vacant. And then some things happen, which culminates on December 9th, 2008, where you were actually arrested in your home by the feds.
So I went to bed on December the 8th, 2008, feeling very good about making a deal on the Senate seat that would have been good for the people of Illinois. And Rahm Emanuel had agreed to, I was told, had agreed to be the go-between to make the deal. I was going to appoint the Attorney General of Illinois, who I did not like. I thought she was one of the most fake people in politics. But her father was the Democratic House Speaker and the chairman of the Democrat Party. He was blocking a lot of my initiatives. I was going to make a deal where we would provide health care to the remaining 1 million people in Illinois who didn't have it. We would provide a massive capital public works bill that would provide jobs for around 500,000 people. We would do it without raising taxes on people. There would be $1 billion of investment for development in low-income communities, which disproportionately were communities of color. And I was going to hold my nose and make his daughter the senator. And it's all on the FBI tapes, which to this day the FBI and the courts would not allow me to play. And I went to bed thinking we were about to have a deal. I also went to bed that night because I had shut down business with the Bank of America. They had violated the TARP agreement that had just passed the Congress when we, the people, the taxpayers, bailed out the financial institutions after the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And there was a small business called Republic Windows, very close to where I am right now in this studio on the near northwest side of the city of Chicago, where they had a line of credit was not being provided by the Bank of America, and the company was going to have to close down, and something like 45 to 50 men and women who worked there were going to lose their jobs. Most of the men and women working there are Latinos, working good, decent, hardworking people, and this was in violation of the agreement that the taxpayers were going to bail out banks like Bank of America. So I called a big announcement, big press conference covered by everybody, suspending business with the Bank of America that my administration did, $2 billion worth of business, until they did right by providing a line of credit to that company and kept that company going, as well as other companies in Illinois. And so I felt real good about that. We had worked it out, and they were about to do it. And then I went to bed, had my running clothes ready to go because I was going to go run early that morning. And psychologically, to get yourself to go run, especially in the cold weather, it's nice to have those clothes right there so you can just put them on. And the phone rang at 6 o'clock right before my alarm went off because it was set for 6. And I answered the phone, and the guy said he was an FBI agent with a warrant for my arrest. I thought it was a friend of mine, a state senator by the name of Jimmy DeLeo, playing a practical joke on me. And I remember saying, "Can I swear here, Vlad? Is it okay if I say?" I'll quote myself. I said, "Come on, Jimmy, stop fucking around. It's early in the morning." State Senator Jimmy DeLeo. But it wasn't him. It really was the FBI agent, and he put my security detail, one of my security guards on, state police officer, and he told me, "No, Governor, they're really here." And well, to make a long story short, they came and arrested me at 6 o'clock in the morning. SWAT team surrounded my house, which was ridiculous. The only reason you arrest anybody is twofold. Number one, he or she is a threat to the community they live in. And number two, they're a risk to run away. Well, I'm a sitting governor of the 5th largest state in America. I'm not going to run away. And my neighbors were safe. So they did this all for show. And they did it purposefully to prejudice the public against me and create a super sensational narrative that would go out and do what it did and make international news. And it did. I mean, we had Japanese television trucks around my house. The Israeli newspapers were in front of my house, not to mention legions of television cameras from Chicago and around Illinois and around the country. So that was the beginning of calamity that came on like a whirlwind, and everything changed.
Okay, so you get arrested, and you start to hear about what's happening and so forth, and you start to find out that the feds have been tapping your phone for months, I guess?
6 weeks.
For 6 weeks. Okay. And there's one part of the phone call that really stood out. And that's when you're on a recorded call saying, and you're talking about the Senate seat for Barack Obama, who, is currently vacant. You said, "I've got this thing and it's fucking golden. I'm not just giving it up for fucking nothing. It's a fucking valuable thing. You just don't give it away for nothing. If I don't get what I want, I'll just take the Senate seat myself."
That's right. And that I'm known for that phone call. I'm known for saying this is fucking gold and I'm not giving it up for nothing. And the context of it is politics. And what you don't hear is the rest of the tape. They just play that. Now, if I was talking about money for me in a Swiss bank account, that would be very criminal. That would be corrupt. And I deserve to go to prison. But first of all, I'm not that stupid. First of all, I wouldn't do it. Secondly, I'm not that stupid. How could a governor get away with doing something like that? To sell the Senate seat of a United States senator and a guy who's going to become the president of the United States, who also is historic because he's the first black president in American history. So you'd have to be out of your mind to even think you can do something like that. No, the context of it was that the night before, on election night, that magical night that I talked about moments ago, where President Obama was about to speak to 500,000 people and the whole world was watching him because he was the first black president in our history. I was backstage where all the other political leaders were, and I was approached by a labor leader by the name of Tom Balanoff, came up to me and said, and he testified at 2 trials under oath saying this, because they didn't convict me the first time on their fake charges. They went and tried me a second time and used an unlawful standard. But he came up to me and he said, Barack called me last night. He wants me to come and see you. He'd like Valerie Jarrett to be the senator. He wants me to set up an appointment and come and see you to see what you want. In other words, make a political deal, horse trading, which is how the business works. So the next day is when I had that conversation where I said, this is fucking golden. I'm not giving it up for nothing. I ran that day, that morning, and I remember I was stretching. I was on my family room floor, cooling down after the run, and I was on the phone, laying on my back, talking to one of my advisors about the Senate seat, talking about how Obama wants to make a deal. And some had suggested, don't even make a deal, just give him whatever he wants. And that's where I said, I'm not just going to give him anything he wants. We're going to make a deal here, something that's good. And of course, lawful. It was just assumed it would be lawful, not something corrupt like how they made it sound. And the reason they've blocked the tapes to this very day is because they're lying motherfuckers and they're corrupt motherfuckers. Because if they were telling the truth, they would play those tapes. They only played 1% of the tapes. They chose snippets, selective snippets of conversations out of context. I couldn't play the full tapes in court, even though I was promised that I could. They wouldn't allow it. I still can't play those tapes publicly so people can hear the full context. And they're covering up what the truth is. And incidentally, the so-called sale of the Senate seat, which I'm known for, was never a crime. It was a big lie from the very beginning. And the appellate court eventually, on the 22nd of July in 2015, after I had spent 4.5 years in prison, reversed those charges. They vindicated what I said from the very beginning, that it was a big lie, that that those things weren't crimes. They were routine political log rolling, is what the appellate court called it. So the case, those charges were reversed. And but what they did was they set in motion this tidal wave of condemnation and put me in a position where, the public was very much against me because they twisted that stuff out of context and made it sound like something that it wasn't. And that was sort of the beginning of what became a very long and hard and unhappy journey that's finally over.
Well, according to reports, Obama actually preferred Valerie Jarrett to be in that position. And I guess you had a conversation with your chief of staff speaking about that, and you allegedly said, all they're going to give me in return is gratitude. The Senate seat is fucking valuable thing. Fuck them.
Well, that's among the many conversations I had on the subject. For 6 weeks, there's like hundreds and hundreds of hours of conversations. We talked about every possible scenario on that Senate seat because it was fucking golden. Very rarely does a governor have something like that, so you want to be able to use it in a way that can do the most good. And, by the way, I legally, as a governor, could have made myself a U.S. senator. The governor can legally appoint himself or herself U.S. senator. So I could have simply said, I'm the senator, and that's the end of that. And we discussed all kinds of options and opportunities during that 6-week period. And we talked a lot about the Valerie Jarrett option, as well as many others, including Oprah Winfrey. Spent 2 days talking about whether I should make her senator. I talked about a lot of options. But along the way, different people had sent different messages to me. Rahm Emanuel, who's a well-known guy, was going to be President Obama's chief of staff. He was the congressman who succeeded me in the 5th Congressional District. He and I had a close working relationship. He had talked to me many times on the telephone calls that were taped. We can't even play those. But he had suggested, he sent an emissary to me to suggest that they would be grateful and appreciative if I made one of 4 candidates senator. And so that was just one of a whole bunch of conversations. So yes, that conversation did happen, grateful and appreciative. He did send someone to say that, if in fact the guy that said it was telling the truth. Sometimes, I learned later on after hearing some of those tapes, a lot of those people were just lying and telling you things that they thought you'd want to hear, or they were saying things that would cover themselves. But that was on those tape recordings, what you characterized.
Okay, so according to prosecutors, they said in exchange for that seat, you wanted a big salary for yourself, either a nonprofit or a labor union. You wanted your wife to be paid, to be on a corporate board where she could get as much as $150,000 a year. You wanted campaign promises, including cash up front, and a cabinet post or ambassadorship for yourself in Serbia. That's Serbia. What they said.
No.
Is there any truth in any of that?
Yeah. No, see, a lot of those things were discussed separately in different conversations. So, for example, discussing the possibility of an ambassadorship somewhere. I made a joke. It wasn't Serbia. I wouldn't joke about where my dad came from like that. I said, they won't even offer me Macedonia, is what I said along those lines, because some of my advisors were suggesting, well, maybe you can be an ambassador. We discussed all kinds of options. Those things are legal, by the way, and routine. With regard to that position that you talk about, they brought those charges, but those things, too, were reversed by the appellate court. Those discussions were legal. They were not illegal. In fact, I was just following up with ideas that others came to me with. And in one particular conversation, I said, well, how would you do a deal like that? I mean, quote unquote, it's got to be done. It's got to be legal, obviously. What do you think? Does this stuff happen? And my advisor said, oh, yeah, it's common. It happens all the time. So they actually played that tape. And I was actually convicted on that tape, which is preposterous because we were just talking, brainstorming. And I asked the question, if we do something like that, it's got to be legal, obviously. Now, the reason they were able to get convictions on it was because they used a faulty, unlawful standard in their jury instructions and misinstructed the jury. Eventually, the appellate court saw that, and they reversed it. So the prosecutors are liars. They're corrupt. They used fake law at a second trial when they failed to convict me at a first trial. And they took pieces of conversations from 6 weeks of conversations and hundreds of hours and pieced them together to create a false narrative. It's fake. It's just like that fake Russian collusion stuff they did to Trump. They did to me. And what they tried to do to Trump at the major league level, to a Republican president, some of the very same people using the very same playbook were successful doing at the AAA level to a Democratic governor. Fitzgerald, the U.S. attorney, very close to James Comey. He was a top guy in the FBI when they did this to me. They felt like they can get away with doing it to a governor in a big state. They could try doing it to a president at the national level. These motherfuckers are dangerous. They're going to steal our freedoms because our democracy's at stake. The people should have a right to choose their own leaders in free, fair, and honest elections. And if they don't like what we're doing, throw us out in elections and in the next election. You got a politician who you got taking cash or taking money in a brown paper bag or something, that's a different story. That's real corruption. But when you talk about doing routine things that are legal, common, and happen all the time in politics, but you criminalize them because you've weaponized yourself as federal prosecutors and using and abusing your power for politics, those people are corrupt. And so they did to me what they did. They thought they can get away with doing it to a president. They couldn't. I'm a Democratic governor. He's a Republican president. You shouldn't do this to anybody in any political party. And Democrats and Republicans should join together to be against this sort of thing because they're going to steal our freedoms. This is the kind of shit they do in Russia.
Well, you get arrested.
You don't mind me swearing, do you, Vlad?
No.
Thank
do your thing. Do your thing.
But that's what they do in Russia, Vlad. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I feel you.
Okay.
I feel you. I came from there. I know all about that. Okay, so you get arrested and you get charged. And obviously, because this has to do with Obama's Senate seat, Obama gets kind of dragged into this whole situation. And at this point, he's president-elect. And on December 10th, he actually called for your resignation. How did you feel when President-elect Barack Obama, who supported you on 2 different terms, is now calling for your resignation?
Well, make sure you add in, and I was the first governor to endorse him for president, and that I had helped him get elected president in a lot of different ways. And then he goes out and does that, what you just said. So make sure you throw that in there. And you know, his best friend was my director of health and human services in Illinois. He asked me to appoint different people, which I did. So I had a good relationship with Obama. We weren't close, but it was good, friendly. And, you know, I know that I was very helpful to him. So when he does something like that, you know, you feel a little bit abandoned. But look, politics is a rough business, tough business. And, you know, one of our great presidents, Harry Truman, used to say, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. And he was talking about politics because there's really no loyalty in that business. A lot of it's just about mutual interests and converging interests, and they tend to be temporary. Now, when calamity came into my life and it blew up on me, Obama was extremely close to it because it all started with the conversations relating to the Senate seat that he began. And he was the one who sent the emissary that began those conversations. And now suddenly I'm caught up in this. He was the one who started it. So 2 days after my shit's hitting the fan, he's looking politically to protect himself. You have to understand in this business, it's how it works. So in that respect, I can't be too aggressive in faulting him. In fact, in so many ways, what he was protecting was even larger than himself. He's the first black president in American history. That's never happened before. And what a terrible tragedy that would be for our country if somehow he got brought down because of something like this with those corrupt prosecutors. So he was right in protecting himself. I don't resent him for that. I have certain resentments about how I was treated later on, but I don't resent him for that. It's very understandable. In fact, my political allies all ran for me when this happened. And they all, pretty much the ones that were my legislative allies, they all voted to throw me out of office when this happened because they had to protect themselves politically. That I understand. So when Obama did that 2 days after, that I understood then, I understand to this day. He was protecting himself politically. You know, when something like this happens, you're the governor of a state like that, and it happens the way it did, it's like you're the captain of a ship, like you're the captain of the Titanic. And that Titanic just hit an iceberg, and it's going down, and everybody's getting off. And you're the captain, you're stuck with it, and you're going down with the ship. So no hard feelings for Obama for doing that. It was the smart thing to do. And I think for our country, the right thing to do, because preserving his presidency was very important moving forward. You can disagree with whether or not he was a good president or not. I would argue he squandered his opportunity to be a good president. He in many ways divided our country. But in the very beginning, when all of that happened, the stakes were too high. He did the right thing by abandoning me. And that I understand from a political point of view.
Well, right. Didn't you actually try to subpoena Obama, which I think has never been done for a sitting president?
No, sitting presidents have been subpoenaed. You know, what we tried to get was his 302s, Vlad, and that means his witness interviews. The FBI interviews people, and the interviews are what's called FBI 302s. And when you're the defendant like I was, and a witness is relevant to your defense, and Obama was central to the defense because one of their big witnesses said that Obama sent him to me. It was important for us to see what Obama said and at least have the opportunity to use that interview as evidence. But to this day, they wouldn't give us his interview, which is very unlawful. A defendant is entitled to the evidence of someone who's been interviewed by the FBI that's relevant to his case, and Obama is a central figure. So the fact that they would never give it to us, and they never claimed executive privilege or national security, because that's bullshit. This was not about national security. It's just another example of how I was railroaded by these prosecutors and by the judge who did everything the prosecutors wanted him to do.
Well, on December 15th, 6 days after all this broke out, the Illinois House actually voted unanimously, 113-0, to begin impeachment. And then everything kind of started to snowball after that. And I guess there was a couple other things they were charging you with. You know, there was the whole Senate seat situation. But then there's another part with the Tribune, which they claimed that there were certain writers that were writing negative pieces about you, and you threatened to withhold state funds unless those writers were actually fired.
Yeah, well, that's, again, more baloney. They brought these fake charges, and then in the first trial, the jury just rejected them. And that was another one of them. I was working to help the Chicago Cubs be able to stay at Wrigley Field and renovate Wrigley Field. And the Chicago Tribune at that time owned the Chicago Cubs. Now, the Chicago Tribune is a big Republican paper, and they were very hard on me all the time. And because I was trying very hard to get the legislature to help the Cubs, it's a long, long story here, Vlad, but they wouldn't do it. We were looking at executive power that the governor had where I could do it by myself. And I was doing that, and I was doing the same thing to expand health care for people who couldn't afford health care. And the Tribune did an editorial blasting me for that, for exceeding my powers, those hypocrites, but they had no problem with me using my power as the governor, my executive authority, in a liberal way to help them. And so there was a taped conversation where my deputy governor was telling me about their editorial, and I was motherfucking them in a private conversation. I never gave them funds, or they had no access to funds from the state. The argument was that I was going to stop helping the Cubs, which was total bullshit. But that went nowhere. It was a fake charge. It was done to prejudice the public against me. And the irony was I was actually helping the Tribune help the Cubs while the Tribune was fucking me when I was trying to help working people get health care. I don't really like the Chicago Tribune. I would say the Chicago Tribune is to me what the New York Times and the Washington Post is to President Trump.
Okay, and there was one more thing. They said that you try to obtain a campaign contribution in exchange for signing a bill to divert casino gambling over to the horse racing industry.
Right. Now, so here's what happened. Here's how fake it all was. So they arrested me on the sale of the Senate seat, and then they threw that other stuff in there. They did not bring charges because all that was fake, and none of that stood the test of time. Some of it was thrown out after the first trial. That sale of the Senate seat was reversed by the appellate court. The three things that stuck were the three things they didn't bring initial charges on, and that's fundraising requests. No one accuses me of taking money for myself personally. In fact, I never got anything. I never even got campaign contributions. The three things, that horse racing bill you're talking about, there was an issue on health care with a hospital. Those were fundraising requests from people who had raised money for me before. So we had politely asked, and I never did. I had emissaries that did it for me, whether they could raise campaign contributions for me while they had business pending before the governor and before the state of Illinois. Now that's legal, perfectly legal, and protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, so long as you never threaten anybody or make any promises. It's called a quid pro quo. There never was a quid pro quo. They don't allege a quid pro quo. They got their convictions at a second trial, and they got those upheld by the appellate court without that legal standard. It's an unlawful standard they used to convict me on fundraising requests. And that's why I spent all that time in prison. And it was wrong. And it's in violation of what the Supreme Court said is the law, 1991 McCormick case. You need what's called an express quid pro quo. I knew where the line was. I never crossed that line, nor did anybody who worked for me cross that line. The way they convicted me on those requests for campaign contributions was to move the line and give the jury the right to infer that if the horse racing guys had a bill that they wanted signed and I asked for campaign contributions, that they could convict me on that. And by the way, I didn't ask. I had an emissary who asked. But if that's the standard, then the very lawmakers who passed the bill and also were raising money from those horse racing guys should have gone to prison along with me. And if that were the standard, every president, every governor, every U.S. senator, every congressman would go to prison, because that's how a lot of campaign contributions are raised. When the big pharmaceutical industry goes to Washington and raises money for U.S. senators, congressmen, and for presidential candidates, including President Obama, frequently they'll do those fundraisers when there's legislation pending before those very bodies, or when a president has to decide whether he or she will sign or not sign a bill. So the things they sent me to prison for are legal, protected by the First Amendment, and I didn't cross those lines. If they gave me the lawful standard, the cases would have been thrown out of court. But the thing was so rigged because I think the stakes were so high. Either a governor is going down or those prosecutors who brought those charges are going down, because if I'm right, and I am right, those guys hijacked a governor unlawfully, twice elected by the people of Illinois. I think the consequences of that were so severe that the appellate court eventually could never uphold the sale of the Senate seat, because that would shut down government everywhere. It would set a dangerous precedent that government could never operate because it's all based upon political deals. But they upheld those three fundraising requests because I think if they would have gone the other way, those prosecutors would find their asses in prison, which is where they frankly belong. Here I am. I'm back. Sorry.
All good. Well, the impeachment starts.
Yes.
And you actually boycotted your own impeachment. You called it a kangaroo court. And instead, you go on a media run. You go on Good Morning America and The View and so forth. You know, they put in a not guilty plea on your behalf. And then I think right around that time, your lead lawyer actually quits and said, I never require a client to do what I say, but I do require them to at least listen.
Yeah, he was making deals with the legislative leaders down in Springfield behind my back, that lead lawyer. And what he did was really unethical, because you got a client, and he called a big press conference and he bashed me and did what you just referred to. You know why he did that? It was because I appointed a United States senator. You see, he was making deals behind the scenes with the legislative leaders, and the deal was this. They offered me this deal. If I agreed to step aside temporarily and not appoint a United States senator after I was arrested, which I had a constitutional obligation to do. But if I agreed not to do it, they would pay me my salary as governor, $170,000 or $190,000 a year. I would keep my security detail. I would be temporarily incapacitated, which means I wouldn't have any power to do anything. The lieutenant governor would be the acting governor. But I would keep my job and my money, the money at my salary. And then once I cleared my name, I could become governor again. This was the offer I was being offered by legislators who were sending emissaries to me, including lawmakers. If I did that and agreed to not pick a senator, I can get that deal. I turned it down for several reasons. Chiefly, I did nothing wrong, so I wasn't going to step aside. I was going to go down fighting. And I knew I was going down because when you are accused of something like that, and it's so big internationally, your political enemies, and I had a lot of them because I was a governor who did stuff for people. Your political enemies seized the opportunity to kill you and destroy you, which is what inevitably was going to happen. And I knew that. The prosecutors knew that. So I rejected that offer. And then I picked a senator, a guy by the name of Roland Burris. I'm the only governor in the post-Reconstruction era up to that time to appoint a black person to the United States Senate. I picked Roland Burris, the former Attorney General of Illinois, statewide elected official, well-respected, highly regarded. He was in his early 70s, and he had nothing to do with the circumstances surrounding my difficulties. But when I sent the senator, it was in response to a letter I received from every United States senator, every Democrat senator. Joe Biden signed it. Hillary Clinton signed it. Harry Reid, the Democratic leader, was on it. All of them. They said, any senator you send us, we're not taking, right? Well, that was their position. My position was, fine, you do your job, I'll do my job. My job is, I did nothing wrong. I was elected by the people of Illinois. Corrupt prosecutors are lying about me and trying to steal me from the people. I'm not giving in. I have an obligation for as long as I'm still governor, which I calculated was about 6 weeks, because procedurally they couldn't throw my ass out of office for 6 weeks or so. They had to go through some of the constitutional requirements for impeachment. But I knew I was a dead man. In the meantime, I'm doing my job. And that part of that job is to pick a senator, because Illinois needs a senator. And so I respected their letter and their position, and my lawyer was making deals telling me don't pick a senator. And I told him I'm going to pick a senator, and then I did. And then he quit, and he said those things. And by the way, I picked Roland Burris, firestorm of controversy. He goes to Washington on Monday. America's watching this on live TV. It's raining in Washington. They won't let him into the United States Senate. Here we are in America in 2008, 2009. We've just elected our first black president in the age of Obama. And they're treating Roland Burris, the United States Senate, the most exclusive club in America, where when Obama is leaving, there won't be one black person there. They won't let this black man in. It was like it was back in the early 1960s in the segregated South at Ole Miss when they wouldn't let James Meredith into that school. That's how far we didn't travel. But the American people saw it, and they were outraged by it. They called those senators, and being the chicken shit senators that they are, which is what most politicians are, they backed down. They not only let Roland Burris into the Senate the next day, they hosted a dinner for him on Tuesday night. In the meantime, my days were numbered, and I was pretty much gone before Groundhog Day, which is what happened sometime, I think, on the 28th or 29th of January, is when I was officially removed from office.
Right. On January 8th, the House voted 114-1 to impeach. You were removed from office by the 29th, prohibited from ever holding public office in the state of Illinois. And then the Senate voted as well, 59-0, to impeach you as well. So you get impeached in both houses. Yeah, that's right. And by the way, you'll get a kick out of this, Vlad. On that House vote, what did you say? It was 114-1? Is that it? Well, the House was 59-0.
No, that's the Senate. The Senate was 59-0.
Sorry,
the House.
I'm sorry. The House. Sorry, the House was 114-1.
Right, and the one I think was a present vote, right? Not a no, it was a present.
It was 114-1 with 3 abstentions.
Okay, you know who that one vote was?
Who was that?
My sister-in-law. She married to. I'm married to her sister. Otherwise, she votes that way too. So I laugh about that because it was was a long time ago, and your wounds healed. But no, that was my sister-in-law, and I had to persuade her. Basically, look, I mean, I said, do what you think is right, but I mean, a vote against me is a vote against your own sister. So she, God love her, took that vote. I think she voted present though. But look, the political dynamic was such where you had to protect yourself politically, and all of my allies, they had no choice, but they had to vote to throw me out of office. And in the impeachment process, the whole thing was rigged and faulty. They wouldn't allow me to play those FBI tapes. They wouldn't allow me to call in FBI agents who arrested me to make them testify under oath. I couldn't call in specific witnesses related to those allegations. In fact, they didn't even bring charges along those lines. Instead, they impeached me on things that were constitutional, legal, and things I got reelected on. The whole thing was a kangaroo process, a political hit job, and the writing was on the wall. I knew it. Everybody else knew it. And there was no point in my political friends who were, in a very hard position to stick their neck out for a guy that was going down. The ship was going down. They got off the sinking ship and protected themselves. It's the nature of a very difficult business, which is politics.
Right. And then on April 2nd, 2009, a federal grand jury issued a 19-count indictment, 16 of which named you with charges like racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, extortion, conspiracy, attempted extortion, and making false statements to federal agents. So, I mean, it's one thing to get impeached, but it's a whole other thing when you have actual federal criminal charges against you.
Yeah, and that's another thing you learn when you're on the dock, on the wrong side of that. It all sounds really bad. Racketeering, right? Extortion, bribery. Sounds bad. But You know what the racketeering and extortion was? 3 fundraising requests from emissaries of mine. That's what that was. It just sounds worse than it is, but the public doesn't know that. And so they really prejudice the public against you. But the truth is, it was fundraising requests that I, to this day, insist were lawful. And I didn't make them myself. They were done by my brother who was working in my campaign and by a friend who was a lobbyist who had asked the horse racing guys for campaign contributions. I wasn't even making them myself. But that's what's the so-called racketeering and extortion and all the rest. But I'll tell you what the real extortion was what those FBI agents and U.S. attorneys do when they shake down witnesses and threaten them with long prison sentences unless they sing or compose. And if they don't say what they want them to say, those guys are facing big-time jail time. And so they find certain people who did things that are wrong, and they threaten them with a long prison sentence and make them say certain things. And a case in point is someone who didn't do anything wrong, but he went to prison for 10 days, but he was rewarded with a short 10-day sentence if he agreed to a non-existent crime that he had conspired with me, my chief of staff, on selling the Senate seat, which they knew, he knew, we all knew was not a crime. So this guy got off easy, 10 days, if he just agreed to give in. And I ended up doing all that time in prison, 2,896 days, for something the appellate court ruled was not a crime. This guy made a practical decision, John Harris is his name, to protect himself. He's 3 young boys. He had to choose between his sons and the guy he worked for. He made the right call. He protected his family. He was rewarded with 10 days if he sang and composed along the lines of what these prosecutors wanted him to do. They're shakedown artists. He did that, and he got off very light. Having said that, for his family, he made the right decision. But those prosecutors made him go to jail for 10 days on something that's not a crime. And eventually the appellate court ruled it was not a crime. But that's how they operate, some of those dirty, corrupt prosecutors, and that's what they did in my case all over the place.
Well, you're facing 20 years for all those charges.
They were asking for a life sentence at first. I'm out jogging one day, Vlad, after I was convicted at the second trial. I'm out jogging, and, I know the future's darker than it was before the conviction at the second trial, and I'm preparing myself mentally and physically for prison, and I'm a physically fit governor, as governors go, and I'm out running 7 miles or so on my ordinary route. And back then, in 2011, there was newspaper stands. They still had paper newspapers, right? And there was a newspaper box, where you put a quarter in or whatever and you get your newspaper. And there I run by this little box, and there's me on the front page, colorful page. All me. And the headline is, Feds ask life sentence, right? I mean, that's startling shit when you're running and you look back and say, man, that was me. And then you go read the headline while you're running in place. And the headline is life sentence. That's what they were asking for. So that's what they were originally looking for. But eventually it ended up being 14 years for nothing. Go ahead.
Okay,
sorry.
we'll get to all that. We'll get to all that.
All right.
I guess, was it right around this time that you ended up appearing on Celebrity Apprentice, which was Donald Trump's show at the time?
Yeah, well, so they throw you out of office and you've got leprosy, right? Nobody wants what you got. So when these feds are on you like that and you've been charged like that internationally, and at that time I was portrayed as the biggest asshole in the world next to Madoff, because Madoff's case hit right about the same time, right? Nobody wants to come near you because they don't want those feds looking at them. So it's a very lonely experience, and you can't do business with anybody. In the meantime, I didn't get rich in the business, unlike almost everybody else. My wife worked as an executive director in a homeless organization, did a great job, but because they get resources from government, federal, state, and local, they terminated their contract with her. Unlawful. I mean, she could have it was a breach of contract, but we can't sue a homeless organization, so both of us don't have any income. We have a mortgage to pay. We have our kids in school, and they were going to Montessori schools, which is private, and you have to pay for that. So we had no income. And then I discovered, strangely enough, that there's one place where you can earn a living if there's interest, and it was the entertainment world. Never in my wildest dreams do I imagine I'm ever going to do reality television. I never watched it. And so that's how Celebrity Apprentice came about, because at the time, I was such a notorious figure in a negative way, but I was good for ratings. And so we had some opportunities to do some reality television, my wife and I, and it helped pay the bills during those period between the accusations and the trials.
Right. And I think that same year you had an interview with Esquire, and this is what you had mentioned earlier. You said, I'm blacker than Barack Obama. I shine shoes. I grew up in a 5-room apartment. My father had a little laundromat in a black community not far from where he lived. I saw it all growing up.
Yeah, that's right. I went to public school, and then I talked about how Obama, didn't really live that experience. He grew up in Hawaii, gone to Harvard and, the Ivy League schools, and that, most of the kids in the hood that I knew growing up and I went to high school with, and that was not their experience. Their experience was similar to what mine was. And I said that, and the context of that is I had an Esquire magazine reporter follow me around for a couple of days. You got to be careful with these news people, they exploit you. And, it's my fault. I said that, and then I apologized for saying it. But it was a Saturday when I said it. I had run that day because I hadn't eaten all day, and I'd run my 7-8 mile route. And we went to a friend's house, a dear friend by the name of Bill Conforti, Italian-American, and he's a good host. He's got all this food out there. We were going to watch the Manny Pacquiao-Ricky Hatton fight with him and some friends. And the reporter from Esquire followed me because he was doing this profile. And he seemed to be a nice guy. And in spite of it, I think he's a nice guy. His name is Scott Rabb. And I hadn't eaten, and I was thirsty. And my host gave me this drink called limoncello. You ever have one of those?
Yep.
It tastes like lemonade, but it's got alcohol in it. And I was thirsty, so I had one. And I wanted another one. And before I know it, I'm like a little bit buzzed, right? And I'm shooting, I'm too free with what I'm saying. And Pacquiao is on the screen, and I start pontificating to this guy about how it starts when you get this hunger in your heart to really make something of yourself. You get what I call a chip on your shoulder. And I told him it starts when you're a kid, it happens in the schoolyard, when someone fucks with you, or, you've had some experiences at a young age, and you have this hunger to prove yourself and a desire. And I was pointing out how Manny Pacquiao has that, because I'm a big admirer of him. I boxed Golden Gloves when I was a kid, so I had an affinity for boxers too. And I'm talking like that. And that's when I spilled into, the affinity that I always had growing up, for the black community and how they were underdogs in our history. And that when I was governor, a lot of my policies were focused on trying to provide more fairness to a community that historically has been fucked in America. And so in that context, I was saying, I'm a lot more, I said my experience made me more black than Obama. I said it then. And then I didn't think much of it. And then weeks and months went by. And then, it takes a while for these articles to come out. I forgot all about it. And then, I don't know, 6 months later, Esquire magazine profile of me came out. And I was like 3:30 in the morning. And I got used to this. It's like Pavlov's dogs, you get used to the sound. You can get the sound of the TV trucks when they come around your house. And the masthead goes up and the blinking sound happens and you hear it. And they generally come for the early morning news around 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning around your house. I started hearing that all too familiar, unhappy sound of those TV trucks. And I jumped out of bed. I knew, oh boy, this has got to be bad. And I look out the window and there the TV trucks were. And I knew this was going to be some bad news somehow. I wasn't sure. I had no idea what it was, but I knew it was bad. But I went back to sleep, figured nothing I could do until 5:30 or 6 when I'll call one of my lawyers. And sure enough, I got a phone call from my lead lawyer. And he says, Governor. And I said, yeah, Sam. And he said, we got a problem. And I said, yeah, I'm sensing that. There's TV trucks around my house. Now what, Sam? And he said, did you say you were blacker than Obama? And my first reaction was, what? What? He said, did you say you were blacker than Obama? And I said, I never said that. And then it dawned on me. Wait a minute, hold on a minute, Sam. Wait a minute. And he said, well, Esquire magazine came out and said you said it. And then my recollection was refreshed, and I said, Sam, I might have said that. Read it to me. What did they say I said? He read the quote to me, and then it all came back to me because it was like 6 months before. And I said, yeah, I think I said that. And he said, well, you got some explaining to do. And so I went out not long after that and met with the media to explain the context of it, apologize to the black community because no white guy should say that because a white guy can never really understand, that sort of day-to-day stuff that some black person experiences in a country that's a majority white or in a place where you might walk into a white neighborhood, particularly back then and in the previous generation, how they might feel. I could never really understand that. And so I correctly apologized for that. And but I acknowledged saying it. And one of the reporters was trying to help me, I think, and she asked me, is it possible you were misquoted? Like you insist that, they won't play the tapes and all the rest. But I said, oh, no, I was quoted properly. I said that. And I apologized for it, and I shouldn't have said it. But I talked about my affinity for the black community and how while it was a big step forward to have elected the first black president, nothing had changed. Obama had been president for a while, and the circumstances and challenges of, the black community, high crime, inferior schools, inferior health care, those things were still very real for everyday people in the black neighborhoods, and that I felt for them, and that's why I said that in part out of frustration. But I apologized. I did say that. And look, I'm not claiming to be a choir boy. I'm not claiming to be the smartest guy in the room. I'm not saying I never said stupid shit. I've said a lot of stupid fucking things, like fucking golden, which I fucking regret ever saying. Okay? But I'll insist to the day I die, none of that shit's criminal. And the criminals were the prosecutors who did to me what they did and stole me from the people of Illinois, because I will say this, and I'll say it under oath. I was a fucking great governor for the fucking people. I was on the side of the people. I fought for the people, and I created a whole bunch of political enemies because I did that. And when they saw their opportunity to fuck me, they didn't hesitate and they did it. You can swear on this, right, Vlad? Because it's too late if
absolutely.
You can't. Okay.
Absolutely. Say whatever you feel.
Okay.
Okay, so the trial continues. You never take the stand during the course of the trial. It concludes. The jury comes back with, finding you guilty of one count of lying to federal agents, but then a mistrial on the other 23 counts. The prosecutors said they're going to retry the case as soon as possible, and then on April 20th, 2011, comes the retrial. This time around, you take the stand. Why do you take the stand the second time and not the first time?
Okay, so I believe when you're innocent, you have an obligation to say you're innocent. I believe when you insist on your innocence, you have an obligation to then not plead guilty. I believe when you're innocent and you've been elected by the people and hired by the people, that you have an obligation to fight for the position the people hired you to do. And I say that because a lot of politicians, you'll notice, Vlad, they insist they did nothing wrong, but they resign. We just saw Cuomo in New York with the sexual harassment stuff he's been alleged to have done. He insists he didn't do anything wrong, but he quit, right? My feeling is, if you quit, you did it. If you really didn't do it, you never quit. You fight and you go down fighting, which is my philosophy, and that's what I did every step of the way. So at the first trial and before the first trial, I fully expected that I was going to testify. I hungered to testify. I was dying to testify. I was talking to the media against the advice of lawyers and what's the custom of lawyers. What they always traditionally say is, lay low, don't say anything in public, because it's going to come back to bite you in the ass later on. Because the prosecutors don't like that. And if they convict you, they're going to come out and punish your ass for doing it. Okay? Now, my feeling was I had an obligation to myself, my children, my little girls, my wife, my late parents, the people of Illinois, my supporters, the people who voted against me. My responsibility to protect the rule of law and the Constitution, to fight back, because I did nothing wrong. It was all legal. All those talks and conversations were legal and constitutional. So I must fight back. And so every forum that gave me a chance to talk, I took it. All kinds of news shows, David Letterman, Celebrity Apprentice, The Today Show, The Tonight Show, Nightline, Dateline. I did all those shows. Fox News, CNN, everything. MSNBC. I wasn't hiding, because that's what an innocent man does. What would Lincoln do if he was falsely accused? What would Teddy Roosevelt do if he was falsely accused? What would Winston Churchill do if he was falsely accused? What would Martin Luther King do if he was falsely accused? My heroes in history. So I'm doing that. So I'm going to testify at the first trial. I want to. And I have an obligation to tell the people what the truth is, as I knew it. But I got to be able to play the tapes to corroborate what I say, because if I can't play the tapes, I know what the prosecutors are going to do. They're going to say he testified to X, Y, and Z, but go back in the jury room and listen to the tapes to see whether or not the tapes back up what he says, right? At the first trial, their case was such bullshit, so flimsy. My lawyers said they proved nothing, and you don't have to defend yourself because they don't even make a prima facie case. The case should be thrown out for insufficient evidence, so let's rest our case. And if you rest your case, Vlad, you can't testify. So we made a decision that their case was so flimsy, just rest, which is what we did. And so we got all of those hung juries, except for the one on the false statement, which is another lie on their part, but I won't go into that right now. At the second trial, they changed their case. They moved the lines on the law. I was told by the judge, he told my lawyers on May 20th, 2011, it's in the record, that if I agreed to testify, I could testify to my state of mind and I could play the tapes to corroborate my testimony. I was delighted. May 20th, 2011. I was delighted. I thought that's my vindication, so I agreed to testify at the second trial based upon the promise of the judge. Well, I agreed. I got up there. Sure enough, when I get up and testify, when we try to play those tapes to corroborate my testimony, guess what happens, Vlad?
You can't play the tapes.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me play the tapes. He lied. And then the prosecutor goes and tells the jury, go back in the jury room, just as I predicted, and see how many times you hear him talk about the things he testified to. So they set me up. It was a total fucking rigged screw job, and the judge was part of it. It's hard for people to believe this stuff. I could have never believed it, but it happened. It's the shit they do in Russia, Vlad. Anyway, next question.
Okay, so the second trial goes forward, and then on June 27th, after 10 days of deliberation, the jury finds you guilty of 11 counts related to the Senate seat and 6 counts related to fundraising extortion of a hospital executive. And then in December 7th of 2011, you were sentenced to 14 years in prison. How did that feel for someone that's, I assume, never did any jail time up to this point? To be told 14 years in prison. And you're how old at this point?
How old was I?
How old were you in 2011?
Okay, so 2011, it's funny because that was 3 days before my birthday, right? So I would have turned 55. I was 54 at the sentencing. Well, you get hit with 14 years, right? And they don't do it like that. They say, the judge will say X number of months. So I think that translates into like 190 something months or something. So when he came down with that.
I just want to say this real quick. So at 54 years old, you're looking at getting out at 68 years old, worst case.
Yes. So he says that, but he does it in months. And so I didn't compute that as fast as one of my lawyers. And I turned to her and I said, how long is that? And she said, 14 years. She whispered to me because it was all happening in real time. 14 years. It's a body blow, right? It's like you've been hit by Mike Tyson in the body in the middle of a boxing match. But you got to stay strong because all eyes are on you. The media's all over the place. My wife's in the courtroom. Soon my daughters are going to learn about this. They're little girls. I've got to be strong above everything, And I give myself high marks for being strong. And I consider myself a badass when it comes to stuff like that. And so you stay strong. It was shocking, but not surprising, if you know what I'm saying, Vlad. Because by then I'd been so fucked by those people, those prosecutors and that judge, that anything they did wasn't surprising anymore. I never took a penny, and I'm going to prison for 14 years. I'm talking about political deals, and if I inadvertently crossed the line, 14 years, I got no criminal record. I've got a lot of good works. I saved lives with my policies with health care when I was governor. I had a clean driving record. I didn't have a ticket, and I'm getting 14 years. And so you might find this interesting. After it all happened, you go with your lawyers in this little conference room and you regroup before you leave the building. And because I was so defiant every step of the way, and we talked about that a moment ago, how I was fighting back. And every forum I could get, I was fighting back against the advice of conventional thinking, which is you lay low because these people have all the power. And if you don't kiss their ass and they get you, they're going to crush you, which is what that 14-year sentence was, which was part of the rationale that the judge had, which was you treated this like a duel and like a boxing match. This is what he was saying. And so, and you were calling the prosecutors' names, which I was. I still am. Corrupt motherfuckers. Anyway, now we gather in the conference room. I'm going to prison, and it's going to be a 14-year sentence. Every day after court, I face the media. Every day. In the worst of times, and in some of the positive stuff when they fail to convict me and all the rest. So one of my attorneys, I like him a lot, kind of a silly guy though, Shelley, says, we're trying to figure out what to do. He said, I made arrangements with the marshals. They're sympathetic to your situation. They'll arrange to take you out through the basement and out through the garage so you can avoid the media and not have to talk to the media. And my first instinct was, were you kidding me? I'm not going to run. I fought every step of the way. Now I got my ass kicked. I'm going to run. No, thank you. I'm not running. I'm talking to the media. Now what do we say? And so because he's a silly guy, a likable guy, but silly, he suggests I go out there and paraphrase former President Richard Nixon's historic press conference in 1962 when he ran for governor of California and he was defeated by Pat Brown, who was the governor who 4 years later Ronald Reagan would beat for governor of California. Some of your listeners might know this history, but Nixon gave what was then known as his last press conference. He complained to the media about how bad they treated him, and he said to the members of the media, they were all men back then, gentlemen, you won't have Nixon to kick around anymore because this is my last press conference, right? So this guy, Shelley, gives me this silly advice that I should paraphrase that with the media. Under the grave circumstances that I'm fucking facing, 14 years in prison, and Patty and I, my wife and I, have to go home and break the news to our little girls, which is the thing that's really weighing on you the most. And so I, of course, reject that. And I end up going down, talk to the media, and I quoted from Kipling's poem, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. And so that's what I did. And so then we went home and sat our daughters down, and my wife especially, because they're so close to their mother, walked them through the difficult times that were ahead of us as a family. But no, it's a crushing thing. And if I could just follow up real quick, Vlad. So we have 2 dogs in our family. We have Skittles and we have Twix. And when I was governor, our little girls were growing up. And our younger one was 8 years old when I left home to leave for prison. So when all of this happened, when I was arrested, she was 5. So she's just a little girl. And our older daughter is 7 years older. So when this all broke, she was 13. And when I left for prison, she was 15. So they wanted a dog. They wanted a puppy when they were little girls, and I was still governor. And it was just we were just so busy, and we just kept saying, maybe, maybe, maybe. We never got serious about getting them a dog, right? Then when Calamity came and I was arrested on the 9th of December, Patty and I felt, what a terrible thing this is for our little girls. Why not get a puppy to give them something they could snuggle with and love and get their minds onto something positive? And so within days, we went and bought a puppy. She was 2 months old, our little dog Skittles. They liked that candy, so they named her Skittles. We were told a multi-poo, but we found out she's just a little toy poodle, but she was just so little. And we named her Skittles. And Patty, my wife, calls her, your daddy was arrested dog, right? So we got her after the arrest. Years would go by, 3 years would go by, and then I just got whacked with a 14-year sentence. So our feeling was maybe we should go and get another puppy to ease the burden for our children. We went to a place called Paws where they have abandoned dogs. And we went and got a little dog that had been abandoned 2 months before. She was just 2 months old too. And she's a mix. And we named her Twix after another candy. And Patty calls her, your daddy's going to prison dog, right? Had Trump not commuted my sentence, we'd have a third dog by now. It would be named Snickers, your daddy never came home dog. But within days of that sentencing, we went to Paws to get Twixie, our second dog. And I'm giving you a lot of background here, but that you asked me how I handled the sentencing. That's what we did. And that is try to ease it for our children as best we could, because those were going to be very difficult days ahead for my family.
Right. And because you were in the feds, you're actually not eligible for parole, so you'd have to serve at least 85% of your time. And they actually put you in Colorado, which is way far from your family.
And I'm the only governor to be put in a higher security prison, Vlad. So the first 32 months, I'm put behind what the inmates call the razor wire, the barbed wire fence. This was designed to break my will to resist. They put you in there with 950 inmates. There were murderers in there, drug dealers, cartel members, bank robbers, con men, a lot of sex offenders, Sureños and Norteños, Crips and Bloods, Aryan Nation, gangbangers, all types. I'm the only governor. 2% of the 950 guys are so-called white collar. So it's the kind of prison that you see in movies. My home was a 6-foot by 8-foot prison cell, 4 cement walls, big heavy iron door that can shut you in, a small window with bars on it, bunk beds, 2 guys in a cell. Real prison. And 2.5 years there until I worked my way to a camp, which is less restrictive. It still sucked, but it was not that badass prison that I was in for the first 2.5 years.
I mean, how was it to go from governor of Illinois to that first night in prison where that door closes on you?
Yes, that's it's I'm trying to come up with the best possible word to describe that, right? Because you'd been way up on top of a high mountain. When I was governor, I had access to a 50,000 square foot governor's mansion. Think about that. I grew up in a 5-room apartment. Now I've got this 50,000 square foot governor's mansion where Abraham Lincoln spent a few nights because he lived right down the street. And he's friends with the governor before he became president. That's how historic that building is, that home. And now I'm in this 6-foot by 8-foot prison cell, right? 5-room apartment, 50,000 square foot governor's mansion, 6 by 8-foot prison cell. What a trajectory, right? All alone, hole in my heart, yearning for home, missing my little girls, worried about them, missing my wife, worried about her. My first night of thousands of nights ahead of me, 14 years ahead of me. If I behave myself well, It'll be 12 and a half years, actually. If I'm well behaved, I get good time. I'm out in something like 12 and a half years, right? My exit date,
Yeah.
just to give you perspective, I walk in on the 15th of March, 2012 at noon, Mountain Time, on a Thursday. My exit date is May 15th, 2024. 2024, May 15th.
Yeah.
And you got a long haul. And your first night there, in that surrounding, in that experience, and you got a lot of this, it's fucking the worst experience I've ever had in my life. It's the worst. And you wish you were dead. You wish you were dead. But you couldn't be weak, you had to stay strong because you love your children and you love your wife. And you can never, ever give in or can't give up. You got to stay strong because of them. And that gave me strength, It gave me the inspiration I needed to push away the despair when it would creep in, and help me get over the bitterness and the anger that I felt, which was frankly the least of my troubles. It was more just like, what the fuck, man? I don't want to have to do this for all this time, right? But when you love your family like you do, you stay strong. And, one of the things as time went by, you adapt. And I read a lot. You can catch up on your reading in prison, Vlad, as you can imagine. And I did. I read a lot. And I read the Bible in ways I never did before. But I also read a lot of other books. And I read this book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. He's a Holocaust survivor. Now, what he went through is 1,000 times worse than me, of course. But he writes in there, the last of the human freedoms is the freedom to choose your own outlook, the freedom to choose your own approach to things in any given set of circumstances. That's the last of the human freedoms. The freedom to choose your attitude in any set of given, your freedom to choose your own attitude in any set of given circumstances. And I had that freedom, even though every other freedom was basically taken from me. And when I would remind myself of what was most important to me at that point in my life, which was my children and my wife, their survival, what was best for them, then I had no choice but to endure, to persevere, to work through it, to stay strong, and to overcome it. I had no choice when I reminded myself that that was my purpose. It wasn't about me anymore, it was about them. And that got me through it.
So here you are in a federal prison, and you're in a high security prison, like you said. So you have murderers, rapists, gangsters, and so forth. And you're very high profile. Everyone knows that the ex-governor of Illinois is right here with us, which is, stripes for certain people. Like, for, doing something violent to someone, stabbing him up or raping him or so forth, could be seen as a good thing for certain groups in prison. So this whole time that you were in prison, were there any violence or, was your life ever in danger at any point?
Well, to your first question, did I witness violence during those 2,896 days in prison? Yes, I did. Of course I did. Not infrequently. It was not uncommon. And sometimes it was nasty and bad. Now, the authorities there they really crack down on that. And if they catch you fighting anybody, even if you defend yourself, you go to solitary confinement, you could even have new charges brought up against you. They're correctly zero tolerance on inmates fighting. And yet it happens, of course, because you got guys living in close quarters together all the time, and there's going to be all kinds of conflicts. There was no air conditioning in that higher security prison. And the first summer there was the hottest summer in recorded history in Denver. And it was nasty in there. Tempers were short. People are living close together. There were a handful of fans. The big, strong, tough guys would control the fans and deny other guys of fans. They would fight over the fans. Some of the fights got bloody. And then these guys would be all fucked up. And then when the police would see it, they would investigate. And they would, if anybody told, they'd get fucked up. That's how you talk in prison. And if the guys who were all bloodied up, if a third party said that they fought, then those guys would be sent away to solitary confinement. They'd be gone for 6 months. You see them come back. They were big, muscled up guys when they were gone. And they'd come back kind of like a frail and emaciated because no weights in there, right? They had good workout facilities in that prison, by the way. So you had a lot of muscled up guys, all tatted up, tough guys like you'd see in movies. So violence was not an unusual occurrence. One of the advantages I had, being a celebrity inmate, if you will, was, people understood that if they fuck with me, maybe there'd be more public acknowledgement of it. They might face more consequences. So that was a bit of a thing that could give me some sort of protection. But inevitably, you're going to have conflicts with guys. I had conflicts with guys over things. And sometimes, it would be uncomfortable and it could break into something more serious. The other thing I had going for me, though, was as bad as a 14-year prison sentence is, Vlad, in that world, in that community, in that culture among inmates and guys who are criminals, when you get hit with a long prison sentence, it's an announcement to all those guys that you didn't snitch, right? And in that world, snitches are bitches, and there's stitches for snitches. You follow me? But if you're not a snitch, you got real street cred, and they have a certain respect for you. And because it was very obvious I wasn't one, because I got hit with a 14-piece, that's how they talk, right? I had a certain credibility and a certain immunity, sort of, that sort of a certain armor around me that protected me to some extent among a lot of those guys. And some of them admired me. There was an admiration because I was taking my medicine and I was not backing down. So in that sense, I think that was helpful to me. And I made friends there. And most of those guys are criminals. They did it. And they were career criminals, a lot of these guys. But they're not bad guys. They went in the wrong direction. Now, there were some guys, a lot of guys there that were really bad guys. Evil motherfuckers, right? But like my mother used to teach me when I was a little boy, in all groups of people, there's good and bad in everything. Good prosecutors and some rotten, wicked prosecutors too. I like to think more good ones than bad ones, but I got some real bad ones in my experience.
Well, then in 2015, you filed appeals. Well, you had filed appeals along the way, but in 2015, the court actually unanimously vacated 5 of your corruption convictions, including the ones about the Senate seat, but actually affirmed the rest. And then on July 21st, 2015, it got to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th District, which overturned 4 of your 18 convictions, but actually kept the 14-year sentencing regardless of what got overturned.
No, what the appellate court did was they vacated that 14-year sentence and got rid of it completely. So I had no sentence. And then was ordered to go back to the court for what they call resentencing. And so, because the big part of the case was not a crime from the very beginning, that centerpiece of their case was what I always said it was, legal. They vacated the sentence, the appellate court, sent it back to the judge with the expectation, I think it's fair to say, the judge would send me home. And by the time I went to resentencing, I had done 4.5 years in prison. The only charges that were remaining were 3 fundraising requests where I never got any money, and none of it was for personal gain. You follow? They add on a bunch of counts to make it look worse than it is, but it was just 3 wrongs, 3 alleged wrongs, requests made by third parties, not even by me. And to this day, I insist I didn't cross those lines either. But nobody in the history of American politics has ever done a single minute in prison for only fundraising transgressions alone, except me, 4.5 years. These guys would go to prison for fundraising and they took money themselves personally. There's a lot of politicians like that, but no one ever said I did that. But I'm the only one now, after they vacated the Senate seat, who's there only for fundraising. So the appellate court reversed the charge of the Senate seat, vacated the 14-year sentence, gave me no sentence, sent me back to court to be resentenced by the trial judge. When I went to resentencing, we gave over 100 letters from inmates who attested to me how I helped them on their stuff, helped them study for their GEDs so they can get their high school diplomas, helped give them advice on their life and different things I was able to do along the way, helping, mentoring, and things like that, the younger inmates. We fully thought, my daughters testified there, we fully thought the judge was going to send me home. And then you really know it's rigged. He put me back to 14 years. This motherfucker, I shouldn't call him that, he's sick, but he put me back to 14 years. And my daughters are in the courtroom, I hear them sobbing. I'm on a videotape, I'm in a building in the prison, in an office building, to do the hearing. And my kids are heartbroken again. And so I'm there for back to 14 years. And it's interesting because that very day, it was August 9th, 2016. See, you remember the dates, Vlad, on these December 7th, 2011 sentenced, August 16th, August 9th, 2016 resentenced, December the 8th, 2008 arrested, right? You remember these days, these dates. On that day later, Trump is giving a speech, candidate Donald Trump, running against Hillary Clinton. He's giving a speech at a rally in North Carolina, and he brings me up. He brings me up because he knew me from Celebrity Apprentice, and he was so good to me on that show. And he condemns that sentence. They keeping this guy in prison for another 14 years? For that, 14 years? And then he linked me to Hillary Clinton, and he said I was something like a choir boy compared to her, right? And then all of them started chanting, lock her up, lock her up. And that I was no longer relevant to his speech. But that was something else, because as hopeless as my situation appeared when that happened, there was Trump, who might be president. And who knows, right? In the meantime, I still had hopes that Obama might do something. But by then, you're running out of your options. And it's looking darker and darker, like I ain't coming home till May of 2024. And that was August of 2016. So that's another 8 years. So there you have it on that date. What's your next question, Vlad?
Well, you mentioned the Trump thing, because then in 2018, he actually had an interview with reporters, and he actually talked about commuting your sentence. He said that your sentence was unfair, and the statements about enriching yourself were stupid. And he also said that that's many other politicians say the same thing. Then in 2019, he made a comment to reporters that he was very strongly considering issuing, a commutation of your sentence. And then in 2020, he actually commuted your sentence on February 18th. Now, he commuted your sentence, but it still held on to the conviction, right?
Right. That's right.
How did it feel when you heard that Trump is commuting your sentence?
How did it feel the moment I heard that he was commuting my sentence and I would finally go home and leave prison?
Yep.
I'll give it to you in 2 words. Fucking golden. That's how it felt.
Fucking golden. I love it. I love it. Okay, so from the time that he announced that he's commuting your sentence to you actually getting out, how much time passes?
2,896 days. Nearly 8 years. 1 month short of 8 years.
But from the time he announces it to the day that you actually walk out of prison, how much time passes?
I'm sorry. On February 18th, he announced it about a little after 11 o'clock Mountain Time. Here again, February 18th, 2020. Of course, that's another date I'll always remember, right? I'll remember all the details of how I learned about it, but it was about a little after 11 o'clock Mountain Time. It was a little after 1 o'clock Eastern Time where he was at the Andrews Air Force Base. About to get on Air Force One, he was leaving the White House. And by about 6 or 6:30 Mountain Time, I was finally out of that prison, a free man, going to the airport to fly home to Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, Trump said, when speaking about you, he said, I don't know him very well. I've met him a couple of times. He was on for a short time in The Apprentice years ago. Seems like a very nice person. Don't know him, but he served 8 years in jail. That's a long time to go.
People say, what about your politics? Because I was a Democratic governor. Well, I'm a Trumpocrat for many reasons, and of course, that's one of them. I mean, I owe this guy, I owe President Trump my freedom, my new beginning, in many ways, my life. I mean, I was like that captain on the Titanic, frantically treading water in the cold North Atlantic for 2,896 days, trying to stay afloat, trying not to drown. And a lot of ships passed me by, including Captain Obama, who I helped get elected. And here's Trump, who I did nothing for. He did something for me, had me on his show, and I got paid. And here's Trump, a Republican, and sending a Democratic governor home doesn't help him at all in his politics, and he does it. So it speaks very highly of him as the type of person that he is. He gets such a bad rap by people who don't know him. And I don't know him that well. I just had that experience on that show. But I saw a side of him on camera and off camera that he doesn't get enough credit for. He's a kind-hearted person who's determined to fix wrongs. He's a tough guy. He's a tough adversary. He's against, if he's, on the other side of you, he's tough, a tough adversary. But he's actually a very kind-hearted guy. And in a world of fake politicians who are all about themselves, fake, selfish politicians, I know so many of them because I work with these guys for a long, long time. Both parties, they're mostly like that. They are politicians. It's why we, the people, mostly don't like politicians. I'm guilty of being a politician. I don't know if I'll ever live that down. You hear me? Okay? It's almost better being inmate number 40892-424 because there's sometimes more honor with those guys than with politicians. But Trump is not one. He's very different from those people. That's why he doesn't fit in. And that's why so many of them want to destroy him, because they are fake motherfuckers. I feel so free with you, Vlad, speaking this way. But that's what most politicians are. They're so full of shit, man. And Trump isn't. And so that's why he's got so many enemies who want to destroy him in his party too, not just Democrats.
Did you and Trump ever meet up afterwards and actually talk in person or on the phone even?
Yes, I've seen him a couple times since I've come home. Saw him last week, as a matter of fact, in Florida.
Okay. And how did those conversations go?
Great. He's great. He's great. Again, by the way, I like his politics. I like what he's doing. He's changing American politics. I watch this from prison and how he's fighting the establishment. It isn't anymore about Democrats versus Republicans. I don't think that. It's we the people against the establishment that controls everything. Really, it's the ruling class against we the people. And the ruling class are Democrats and Republicans, the mainstream media, now Silicon Valley, and those established multi-billion-dollar businesses that have been created since I've been gone. That's sort of the new world today. It's the ruling class against the people. And corporate America, ruling class, a lot of Democrats, a lot of Republican politicians are part of that. Trump is the new politics. And a lot of his politics and Bernie Sanders' politics is not that far off. It's just the way to get to those places. Because I would argue that both of them are on the side of the little guy, where the establishment politicians, the Pelosi's and the Mitt Romney's, the John McCain's and the Chuck Schumer's, they're the same. And so Trump speaks to this new kind of politics. And the irony is it's divided really in the wrong places. It should be we the people against the ruling class, less about Democrats versus Republicans. And the cynical politicians use race, the race card, to divide the people. And this new neo-racism that's out there, very unhealthy for our country, is further dividing us, not bringing us together. We got to find ways, common sense ways to find common ground and communicate about truthful things. If we do that, our country will heal itself and get better. Obama had the political skill, the talent, and the opportunity to do that. And in that, he fucked up. He didn't do it. He divided us. This I truly believe. This is partly why I have some resentments towards him. Some of the political stuff with me, but when it comes to his ability to actually heal the country, he went the other way, and he made our country further divided. And that is really, in my view, a real tragedy.
Right now, Joe Rogan.
He's fantastic. A great American hero.
Okay, and I think that you're very qualified to answer this question as someone, as a white man who said things like "I'm blacker than Barack Obama." When you've seen the news come out with Joe Rogan, using the N-word, multiple times when quoting things and describing things and so forth, as well as comparing black people to Planet of the Apes. And there's another comment about, saying that the black brain is different than the white brain and so forth. How would you, really characterize those statements, and how do you feel about them?
They're rotten statements. They're terrible statements. They hurt to hear. And I know he's expressed his regrets and his apologies for saying those things. I know that he's actually said that when he hears himself say those things or heard himself say those things all those years ago in a different time, that he winces and it hurts him to hear it. He should have never said it then. You should never say anything like that. That Planet of the Apes joke was terrible, very bad. And I think people have a right to be angry at him for that and not listen to him. They should have the freedom to not listen to him. But he should have the freedom to continue to make his views heard. That's the other side of the coin. We don't have to, we should be free to not like what some people say. Let me say something about that issue, about that N-word, though. Because let me say this. On those FBI tapes, those hundreds of hours, notice how you never ever hear me say that N-word, because I never do. They got me saying fuck and motherfucker. I think they got me saying cocksucker. You hear me? Comes naturally.
Yeah.
You follow me? I'm on those tapes saying all that shit, and it's too bad I say it. No women were on those calls. Those were private conversations. If I ever said the N-word, those people would have played that over and over and over and over again. I never say it because I consider that the ugliest word in America. I even said the C word 6 times. I checked. I regret saying that. I have daughters. I shouldn't have said that. I said it about someone who's a fake and I was going to make her a senator if I got a good deal for the people. I said it. But I never said the N-word. I don't say those ethnic slurs either. Because my mother was very good about raising me that way, right? And I just think it's so ugly and wrong. But I say that I'm telling you this because what Joe Rogan, he uses those words. He did back then. I'm sure he doesn't now. He used them back then, and he was very wrong in using them. Very wrong. But I think he did a good job explaining it. I think he expressed sincerely his apologies for saying it. And I just think it's wrong to cancel people. It's just wrong. And when I say cancel, I don't mean you got to be forced to listen to them. It's like my Christian faith requires I forgive people who fuck me. And I try very hard to do this, okay? Because that's what my faith teaches me I must do. And I'm not here to proselytize any particular faith on anybody. I'm just telling you what I have to try to do. And those prosecutors I have yet to forgive. I don't hate them, but I don't want to lie to God. I haven't forgiven them yet. But a lot of other people who've screwed me, I've forgiven. But I think part of forgiveness is also, doesn't require you to have relationships with people who've hurt you or have screwed you. You see what I'm saying? You shouldn't hate them. You shouldn't go out to seek vengeance. You shouldn't be for payback. That's how I interpret Christian forgiveness. On the other hand, it doesn't require me to have to be with people who have hurt me. You follow my thinking here, Vlad?
Yeah.
So what I'd say about Joe Rogan is to anybody who was offended by what he said, and that's a lot of people, including me, I was offended by that too. He said a long, long time ago, no one says you got to listen to the guy. Turn him off. But I think it gets bad is where you go out and have a concerted campaign to destroy somebody. See, that I think is beyond what we should do as a loving people. Because I do think, and I think common sense tells us this, we're just hating each other too much. I came home to a world that hates each other more. Americans hating each other more than they did when I left on the 15th of March, 2012. And that can't be good. And white people and black people should be loving each other, not hating each other. And I think bringing this stuff up, and I think the motivation is more sinister than just trying to correct somebody who made a mistake. I think the motivation is more about further dividing us. And I think that's what was behind this hit job on Joe Rogan, was part of that, further dividing people along the lines of race. And the people that get hurt most on this division are black people. We have crime that's crazy in Chicago, murder out of the record numbers of murders, record numbers of carjackings, smash and grab robberies, gangbangers 11 years old carjacking vehicles, and 75% of the victims of these crimes, of the murders, are black people. And these crazy Democrats want to defund the police and abolish the police. some of the energy in the Democrat Party is all about that. And I just think that's just ridiculous. And the point I'm trying to make is they want to keep dividing us. We should try to bring people together. Bad cops should go to prison. And I know about bad cops, but good cops should be protected and supported. And more cops are good cops than bad cops by far. And it's just stupid to not back the police to try to fight criminals who are criminals because that's what they do for a living. They are criminals. I know criminals. I live with them for 2,896 days.
Last question. I've interviewed a lot of people over the years who went to prison for various things. And not all of them, but a lot of them, they go into prison upset, angry, feeling like they got set up, feeling, a lot of times that it was, racial profiling, it was a grudge, it was some other reason, and so forth. But a lot of them, once they get to prison, they eventually come to the conclusion that, something, at least partially, I'm to blame for being in this situation. I can't keep blaming other people, and I have to look within myself and look at the mistakes that I made and accept those mistakes and so forth. Now, looking back at what happened to you in the prison time that you did, do you feel in any way that you have responsibility for putting yourself there and there's mistakes that you made that you should have handled differently?
Of course. A lot of mistakes, a lot of misjudgments. Misjudged certain people that I thought were different than who they were. Could have been more vigilant in holding certain people accountable when I heard things about them, but I chose not to believe them because they were helpful to me and I didn't want to believe that. There's a guy named Tony Resco who was close to both Obama and me, who was a central figure in some of the difficulties I had. He's the guy that bought a lot for Obama. Obama bought this mansion when he was elected to the United States Senate, and Resco bought the adjoining lot because the Obamas didn't have enough money to buy the mansion and the lot, so he bought it. And this is public knowledge. It was out in the media. And Obama called it bonehead. I'm sure Obama would agree with me that we both made a misjudgment on that guy. That guy had raised money for me, was very helpful to me, and I relied on him a lot. And I heard things about him. I didn't want to believe him. And it turned out he wasn't everything I thought he was. So, of course, I made misjudgments and mistakes. I said stupid things, of course. I prosecute myself on the way I approached the post-arrest and the prosecution against me, how I fought back. I prosecute myself on whether or not that was the smart thing or the right thing to do, right? Because it wasn't just about me. My daughters lost their father for 2,896 days. It would have been a lot less had I not fought back like I did. I asked myself, did I let pride get in the middle of all of that? Too much pride. And I should have been quiet and just taken my medicine, recognized these guys have so much power, so they have unlimited resources, the ability to destroy you financially, to destroy people around you just to get to you, that they can try you as often as they want. You could actually not get convicted at a first trial and they can try you again, which is what happened to me. And then I'm told they can keep doing that. And that it's unlikely that I could ever get complete acquittals because there's always going to be somebody on the jury who doesn't like me because I was a governor and you piss people off. And, Republicans on the jury against me were not good for me, right? Because I was a Democrat governor. So I asked myself, could I have been less prideful and I should have just been more realistic and not fought back and maybe taken a light sentence and just give in? Because they dangled 18 months after they didn't convict me the first time. If I'd have just gone away, they dangled 18 months. They sent my brother to me, my older brother to me, who was an innocent man, an honest man. They brought charges against him after the first trial when they failed to convict either one of us. They recognized, they dropped the charges against him. They tried to get me to plead guilty. And use him. In other words, they dropped the charge against him if I would plead. And ruin my relationship with my brother. So I asked myself, could I have been less prideful? And, look, my daughters, I think, when I think about how unhappy my life has been because of all of this, I mean, the biggest victims are my daughters and my wife because they didn't choose that business. I did. I chose that fucking business, right? It's almost like the scene from Godfather Part 2, right? You remember that scene, Hyman Roth? He's talking to Michael Corleone. They're in Cuba and he wants Michael Corleone to give him the money. And he gives him that speech about how he had this visionary named Mo Green and he took a bullet in the eye. He was a protege of mine. I didn't say anything about it. I understood that's the business we chose. You remember that scene? So I chose the politics, the life of a politician, the political business. My daughters were innocents in this. And my wife, not like my daughters, but certainly far more, she was just supportive. She didn't want that life. And I brought all that on them because of the business I chose. So if you're asking me, am I guilty of all of that? Of course I am. And have I prosecuted myself and convicted me for that? Yes, I have. Did I break a single law? Fuck no. I did not. And did I do the right thing fighting them like I did and then get my ass kicked the way I did? In spite of it all, I still think I had no choice. Because here's the difference between me, Vlad, and probably all those other guys you talk to. You know what that is?
What's that?
I didn't have a business decision alone to make, you see? Because if it was just a business decision, if they were squeezing me, and they wanted me to say that something that's a non-existent crime was a crime, and I have to cut my losses because I can't fight these people financially, and they're eventually going to get me anyway, I'll cut my losses, I'll take a hit, I'll take a conviction, I'll go to prison for a little while, I'll come back, and I'll start my business again, and my family won't get destroyed financially. If it was a business decision alone, I think maybe you make a tactical retreat, you cut your losses, you make a deal. You see what I'm saying? If I was a career criminal, if my life was a drug dealer, and I was in a criminal enterprise like that, and this is what I do for a living, which is what these guys do. I'm an expert on this. I lived with them for 2,896 days. If I do that and I evaluate their case against me, do I cut my losses and say I did it because I did it anyway? Because most of them do it. I do it. I cut my losses. But see, I didn't do it, and I was what? An elected governor of the people twice. And when you're the governor, you twice swear on the Holy Bible, serve, protect, and defend the Constitution and the rule of law. And they hired me, you see, and they put their trust in me. And I wasn't perfect, and I wasn't like I was a choir boy in that business. I played politics tough, because you can't win if you don't play it tough. But I didn't break laws, and unlike everybody else in this business, I never got rich because I played it honestly. I destroyed family relationships because I wouldn't let them get rich during my time as governor. So if you're asking me, after thinking about it like I have, and I had all that time to think about it and still do, should I have had less pride? Of course. But did I have any choice in fighting back? I don't think so. I think I had to fucking get my ass kicked and suffer like I did. I don't think I had a choice. And I'll say this about where I am now. It's what Winston Churchill said about nations. He said this about nations. When the Nazis were coming and Britain was all alone and France fell and they were facing this unbelievable German army that was winning everything. And Churchill was defying all the odds, encouraging the British people to stand up and fight. Churchill said, nations that go down fighting come back, but nations that shamelessly surrender never do. So had I shamelessly surrendered, there's no comeback. And where I am right now, it's what an old Irish proverb says. Even God can't make two mountains without a valley in between. I'm out of the valley. I'm climbing back up. I'm not saying it's going to be in politics, but I'm making my comeback in life. And I do believe it's going to be a great comeback. And I do believe, Vlad, the reason it's going to be great is because I never gave in to those motherfuckers. That's what I think. How's that answer? It's long, wasn't it?
It's a great answer. It's a great answer. Well, Rod, I appreciate you coming in and sharing your story. A very historical story. You know, after you and I are both gone, you know, students will be studying your career, and, you know, there's still a lot left to the story. You know, I don't think we're anywhere near done. I think there's a lot more for you to write and a lot more for you to do. And, you know, you did your time, you know, and ultimately, whether people agree with you or disagree with you, I think they have to respect the fact that even after all that prison time, you still come out and you're still saying, I'm standing upon my principles. I don't think I did anything wrong. I'm not switching up my story and so forth. And I think that does say a lot, because a lot of people, I think, would have ultimately folded or, admitted to lesser charges, pled out, taken the easy route. And you ultimately did not. You stood by whatever you felt was right in your own mind, and you had the repercussions of that. And now you're back, and you're back with your family, back with your daughters, and looking forward to what you got going on next.
That's awfully nice of you, Vlad. Thanks for saying that. If I could just say one last thing. You talked about those students who may be reading about this down the road, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to just leave you with my piece of advice to those young students. You know what it is?
What's that?
Stay the fuck out of politics.
There we have it. There we have it. That's how we're going to end it. Rod, thank you so much for your time. Wishing you all the best.
Thanks, Vlad. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Peace.